Hitler's biggest blunders. When the cracks in the Third Reich finally split wide open, the Third Reich didn't collapse in a single thunderclap. It cracked, it splintered, it bled out slowly through a series of catastrophic mistakes, many of them driven by one man's ego, impatience, and refusal to listen. This is the story of how Adolf Hitler didn't just lose World War II on the battlefield, but sabotaged his own war from the inside. And once you see these blunders stacked together, the fall of Nazi Germany feels less like fate and more like self-destruction. Welcome back to 0 Hour World War II. Let's cut straight to the damage. The first major crack appeared with Hitler's obsession with total control. From the early days of the war, German generals were trained professionals with deep experience. But as victories piled up in Poland and Western Europe, Hitler became convinced he was the real military genius. He increasingly overruled his commanders, issued orders from maps hundreds of miles away, and demanded absolute obedience. Strategy gave way to ideology. Flexibility died. When conditions changed on the battlefield, German forces were often forbidden to adapt. Retreat was labelled weakness. Holding ground at all costs became doctrine, even when it made no military sense. This rigidity would later cost Germany entire armies. That arrogance exploded fully with the invasion of the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa was not just ambitious, it was reckless. Hitler believed the Soviet Union would collapse in weeks. He ignored intelligence reports, dismissed logistical warnings, and underestimated both Soviet manpower and industrial capacity. German troops advanced fast at first, but speed hid a fatal flaw. Supply lines stretched thin. Fuel ran out. Winter clothing never arrived. When the brutal Russian winter hit, German soldiers froze, machines failed, and momentum died. Hitler had gambled everything on a short war and lost control of time itself. World War II doesn't forgive bad planning, and the Eastern Front devoured German strength like a furnace. Another blunder followed closely behind: Hitler's refusal to prioritize clear objectives. Instead of focusing all efforts on one decisive goal, he constantly shifted targets. In the Soviet Union alone, he split forces between Moscow, Leningrad, and southern oil fields. This diluted German power at critical moments. The push toward Moscow stalled just miles from the city, not because Germany lacked strength, but because that strength was scattered. When winter arrived, the chance was gone. History doesn't reward hesitation dressed up as ambition. Then came Stalingrad. This was not just a battle. It was an obsession. Hitler turned a strategic withdrawal into a fight to the death over a city that carried symbolic weight but limited military value. When German forces became encircled, experienced generals urged a breakout. Hitler said no. He promised air supplies that never arrived in sufficient numbers. He ordered an entire army to stand still and die. By the time the surrender came, over 300,000 German soldiers were lost. Stalingrad shattered the myth of German invincibility and sent a clear message across the world. The Third Reich could bleed, and bleed badly. Another fatal mistake was Hitler's war against reality itself. He invested heavily in so-called wonder weapons, believing, that technology could compensate for strategic failure. Jet fighters, massive tanks, long-range rockets, some were honestly impressive. But none arrived in numbers large enough or early enough to change the war. Resources that could have strengthened existing forces were drained into projects fueled more by fantasy than practicality. World War II was won by production logistics and coordination. Germany had brilliance, but not balance. Hitler also made an enemy out of time by declaring war on the United States. This decision remains one of the most baffling strategic blunders of the entire conflict. The United States was already supporting Britain and the Soviet Union, but Hitler removed all doubt and unified American industry, military power and public opinion against Germany. The result was overwhelming. American factories produced aircraft, tanks, ships and supplies at a scale Germany could never match. By bringing another industrial giant fully into the war, Hitler sealed Germany's fate long before Allied troops landed in Western Europe. As the war turned against him, Hitler doubled down on denial. He blamed generals, demanded impossible counterattacks and issued stand-fast orders that turned tactical defeats into total disasters. Entire divisions were destroyed because they were forbidden to retreat, even when surrounded. The more desperate the situation became, the tighter Hitler clung to control. Leadership turned toxic. Initiative vanished. Morale collapsed. One of the deepest cracks was Hitler's ideological blindness. He viewed enemies not as military opponents, but as inferior obstacles destined to fall. This mindset led to brutal occupation policies that fueled resistance across Europe. Instead of stabilizing conquered territories, Germany faced constant sabotage, uprisings and partisan warfare. Resources were drained. Security forces were stretched thin. Hatred replaced strategy. In World War II, brutality without calculation always backfires. By the final years of the war, the Third Reich was running on fumes. Air superiority was lost. Fuel was scarce. Cities burned nightly. Yet Hitler still believed victory was possible through willpower alone. He ignored reality until reality arrived at the gates of Berlin. The cracks that began with arrogance had widened into total collapse. And that's the real lesson here. Nazi Germany didn't fall because it lacked strength or talent. It fell because its leader refused to adapt, refused to listen, and refused to accept limits. Hitler's biggest blunders weren't isolated mistakes. They were symptoms of a system built on ego instead of reason. If you found value in this deep dive, make sure to subscribe to 0 Hour World War II, share this video with fellow history fans, and keep the conversation alive in the comments. History matters when we understand how power breaks itself.